Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is pilot. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear pilot used is to mean to guide or steer. So this first definition is going to be much more broad, just any sort of guiding or steering. We can use this verb pilot. The second way you might hear pilot used, though, now gets a little more specific. We're guiding or steering either an aircraft, a ship, a boat, etc. A third way you might hear pilot used is to mean to test something before it is introduced more widely. This third definition is really common in many businesses, in research, this idea that we're going to test something out before we use it again with a larger group or a wider population. You should know that pilot is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, we're going to add ing to form piloting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. Our base verb pilot ends in a T sound. So our past tense ending is going to make an id sound. We're going to add an extra syllable as we say this. It should sound like this: piloted, piloted. Now, I do have a couple of phrasal verbs for us to look at. You're going to notice this idea of guiding and steering is going to be connected to all of them. One phrasal verb you might hear is to pilot in or pilot into. So here we're guiding either some aircraft, some watercraft into a particular place. An example of this might be, can you pilot the boat into the harbor? So we're asking someone here, do you have the ability to guide or steer the boat into this particular place? Sort of the opposite of pilot into would be to pilot out or pilot out of. So here we're guiding or steering something out of a particular place. An example here might be, she piloted the plane out of the rough air. Right? So maybe some kind of an unstable environment, but guided it, steered it out of that. The last phrasal verb you might hear is pilot through. So as you can imagine, we're now guiding, steering either an aircraft, a watercraft of some kind through a particular place. An example of this might be, astronaut Eileen Collins piloted the shuttle through space in 1995. Right? So our place here is space. Now let's continue using our verb of the day pilot in a couple different verb tenses. Today we're going to practice the simple present and the present perfect progressive. Let's start with the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about habits and routines. We also use it to discuss facts. The sort of tricky thing we have to remember about the simple present is to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we're just going to use this base form of the verb. We don't have to make any changes to the ending. But if our subject is he, she, or it, then we need to add an S to the end of the verb. You can see that in my example here. He pilots a weekly flight from Chicago to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So here I'm describing somebody who has this particular habit or routine of flying from Chicago to Wyoming. If I want to make a negative simple present sentence, again, I need to pay attention to my subject. My subject is I, you, we, or they. I'm going to use do not, or the contraction don't, and then the base verb. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'm going to use does not, or doesn't, the contraction, and the base verb. So notice I'm not using the S on the end of the verb in the negative. Another example here might be, the commander doesn't pilot the International Space Station. So this particular person is not in charge of guiding or steering this particular aircraft, or spacecraft, I should probably say. Next, let's look at making a yes or no question. To do this, I'm going to start with do or does, whichever form matches my subject, and the subject comes next, and then I'm going to use my base verb. An example of this might be, does this location frequently pilot new menu items? So here's an example of something tying back to that third definition of testing something out. And this happens with many large restaurant chains. They have an idea for a new item to serve. They will test it at one or a few locations before sending it to all of their many locations. Now let's take a look at the present perfect progressive. We use this verb tense to describe an action that started in the past and continues in the present. And many times we're focused on how long that action has been continuing, and that's why we're using this verb tense. With the present perfect progressive, some teachers or some textbooks might call it the present perfect continuous. That's fine. Just know they mean the same thing. I like calling it the present perfect progressive because it helps me remember I need three parts, or the three P's here, to make this verb tense in the affirmative. To do this, again, I'm going to pay attention to my subject. If my subject is I, you, we, or they, I'm going to use have. But if my subject is he, she, or it, I'll use has. So have or has. Then I use been, B-E-E-N. That's the participle form of be. Then I use the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. Many companies have been piloting 4-day work weeks for the last year. So again, this idea, they're testing them out. Is this effective? Does it make our workers more productive? Again, with this idea of maybe we will apply it more broadly to our entire workforce. If you want to make a negative present perfect progressive sentence, our structure is going to be have or has, then not, then been, then the ing form of the verb. Here's another example. She hasn't been piloting the ship since her eye injury. This might make sense, right? Someone's maybe not able to see as well, so they're not going to be in charge of steering or guiding. Lastly, if you want to make a yes or no question in the present perfect progressive, start with have or has, whichever form matches your subject. Subject comes next. Then we have our participle been, then the ing form of the verb. Another example, has the retailer been piloting new self-checkout kiosks? Okay, again, so this idea of testing something out to see if it sort of works well, and they want to use it at all of their locations. Now, let's take a moment and look at some words and phrases that are related to our verb of the day, pilot. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So same spelling, same pronunciation. The noun pilot can be used to refer to the person who operates the controls of an aircraft. An example of this might be, she's been a pilot for Delta for 5 years. So we've got a specific airline here. I'm referencing someone's job, their role within this company. A second way you might hear pilot used is to refer to a television program that has just been made as sort of a test. They're testing the audience reaction, right? If they like it, they're going to make more. If they don't like it, that will be the end of it. An example of this might be, the producers recast several parts after filming the pilot. So they filmed a test episode, right? And they realized maybe this person is not quite right. We're going to bring in a different actor for that particular role. Another way you might hear the word pilot used is as an adjective. And when it's used as an adjective, we're usually referring or describing something that has been done as a test. And again, it's this idea of we're testing it before we roll it out to a wider population. An example of this: they're conducting a pilot study on a treatment for long COVID. Okay? So, and this happens rather frequently in medicine, where I have an idea for a new treatment we're going to test on a small group before we try it out on everyone. The phrase we're going to look at today is on autopilot. So first, you should know this phrase has been shortened from automatic pilot, right? So this idea something is automatic, it's done without thinking or without some sort of intervention, some controls. So one way this phrase on autopilot gets used is to refer to some sort of device that's allowing either a plane or maybe even an automobile to continue on its course without having someone else manipulate the controls. So an example of this: was the car on autopilot when it crashed? Right? Was someone else operating the controls, or did the software and technology not recognize the situation, and perhaps that led to the crash? Now, this phrase on autopilot also gets used more informally, I would say. And so a person might uh, describe themselves with this phrase to note that they were acting or functioning without really thinking, right? They were just kind of going through some motions. An example here: he was on autopilot while running errands and didn't realize he was still wearing his pajamas. So here we're describing somebody who kind of maybe got up in the morning and thought, I need to do A, B, and C, and just started that habit, that routine, without thinking, oh, and I need to put some clothes on before I leave the house. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.